Welcome to the Mindshare podcast. Today we have JT. JT is the founder of Overline. Overline is a brand and UI design studio that helps B2B tech startups become the obvious choice in their category. Welcome, JT.
Thanks for having me on. Great to be here.
Before we get started, actually, I'm keen to hear the origin story behind Overline. Like, what was the problem that maybe you're trying to solve or you saw in the market that made you start like, oh, Overline needs to exist?
Yeah, for sure. So I was working in house at an agency actually, and it was in 2020. And so it was around COVID, and there were some obviously implications to that just in my current role and things like that. And so a salary reduction across the board. I had gone out and just basically started to try to find more freelance work doing like UI UX and product consulting and things like that, because that was more of my bread and butter. And then that kind of started to take off. And what I realized is that, I had all this product background and doing UI UX and designing products and things like that for B2B software. And then now had the agency experience doing branding. And to me, I saw an opportunity to just try to create an agency around myself initially and have it be both about branding and brand identity, as well as product design and UI UX. And so you're really trying to straddle both of those sides and helping specifically founders. Generally it's smaller teams or more startups that are going through either a rebrand and they need to kind of re-envision who they are and figure out how they're going to communicate themselves to the market, or could be a brand new startup and helping them figure out everything from their product and what is their product experience going to be, as well as how do they communicate that message and present it professionally to the world through their website, marketing materials, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, not really a super unique origin story, but it just was one of those things where I was able to take my skills to the open market and have been successful at starting to grow the business that way.
How do you think about brand? Because on the one side, maybe people consider brand as like the UI UX, the design side of things, and then the other side is probably the messaging, the positioning, what they want the world to know them for. And so how do you think about this for clients?
Well, I think my understanding of brand, I think, is evolving rapidly today. If you were asking me today versus what it was, I think there's the more traditional answers, which would be something like you might hear from Marty Neumeier, who, I don't know if you've read any of his books, but he's fond of saying and famous for saying, it's not what you say it is, it's what they say it is. And so that's basically what's the reputation that you are creating in the market. I like to use the words reputation as well as reach. So who knows you, and then what do they know you for? Fast forward to today, I definitely put a lot more emphasis specifically within the realm of B2B and B2B tech and software and things like that, that the product really is, the product experience is kind of the main avenue through which you build that reputation and through which you build that reach. So that's why I think you have to focus on the product and the experience of the product, not just how you're communicating and kind of going to market.
Right. So it's not like a front-facing website, homepage sort of activity, but it's also the back
end
as well.
Yeah, the proof has got to be in the pudding. I think that if you get people in and you haven't really created value, then you're going to end up, not with a very good reputation, and it's going to leave a sour taste in people's mouths. So to me, I think it really has to be through and through. The value actually has to be there in creating a change and creating some sort of meaningful transformation in a customer.
The transformation part, I think it's really important, even in the messaging or just how you frame certain problems. I think people always want the outcome rather than maybe the features,
right.
And so it's really trying to sell that. You have some interesting terminologies. I kind of want to talk through a few of them. One of them is experience market fit. Can you talk more about that?
So I think one of the common reasons why people come to Overline is because they've reached product market fit. Everybody's familiar with product market fit. They feel like they've got customers, they are making progress and headway in the market and whatnot. Oftentimes what you'll find is that the experience of their brand, their marketing, even the visual identity, maybe the product itself, like the product UI UX, doesn't really match the innovation that they've created. So their product might be at a certain point and they just haven't updated their marketing, they haven't updated their messaging. And so there's this gap, is sort of this dissonance between what they really have for their customers versus how they're currently marketing that and presenting that to the world. So that could be one avenue. And in that case, you're basically coming in to really understand and to build out a brand strategy, to clarify their positioning, and then create a visual identity that's more rooted in that new understanding of their business and the direction that they're going. The other side of it is just, you
What
know,
is
no, go ahead.
what is like the symptom of that? Like, when does a company realize that this is a problem that they need to solve? Because it feels very intangible. There aren't actual quantifiable metrics to
Right.
uncover this. So
Yeah.
how do you
I
think
mean, I
about
think that in the B2B context, oftentimes it's going to be that they're, if it's a new startup, they're going to be scrappy and wanting to be getting something out. And you'll often find it's, the so-and-so's cousin basically built the first version of the website and it was good enough for now and it got them out and getting conversations going. But after, they're like, we looked up and now we have 50 customers and we realized that we're starting to move up market and our online presence is really just holding us back. So I think it's probably much more of like an impression that they feel, and it's also an embarrassment that they feel about how they're presenting themselves
it?
online.
Mm,
The other function is just having small teams. And so you have limited resources and limited focus. So you're much more focused on product development and on innovation. And you're not really worried about marketing or how, that's going to be presented to the world. And so it's just a resourcing problem where you're not big enough to really justify having like a branding, role or a dedicated marketing person. And so you just end up focusing on one thing, which you need to do. You got to focus on and build the product and create the value. And then you look up and you realize, yeah, this is not, don't look at the website. Or people often, sort of like, yeah, don't, let's get on a call and I'll walk you through it. And we're not really representing it well online.
it feels like they're kind of embarrassed about their website to kind of showcase. But
Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
I think the homepage should be something that you're proud of to be able to showcase the customers, referral partners, whatever. And
Yeah.
so when you work with a
Well, and
client, what is
it
the
can also, I guess I'll also add it. It may not necessarily be the website. I think it can also be the product as well. I think that I've
mm,
oftentimes worked with more technical founders, people who are engineering minded, a real sense for what the technology needs to do, what the automation is, or what the innovation is technically, but presenting that in a way that's consumable to their customers, that's a very different skill set. And so things like usability and just overall general, design heuristics and things like that, that's another value that, having a design partner can bring to the table, is it just gives an outside perspective, because you end up kind of living inside of this bubble where you understand everything about your technology. So you understand how to use it, but oftentimes it's not necessarily the most user friendly or approachable.
fair enough? What is the first thing you do when you like work with a brand? Like, what sort of things do you audit to say like maybe the product is doing well, maybe the brand is landing, or the vice versa? Like, what is it that
Yeah.
you look for?
The biggest thing that we look at is mostly just through conversations and talking to the founder, talking to anybody that's doing any kind of marketing, anybody that's doing any kind of sales, and just getting a really clear picture of what is available, how are people finding them, and what their website looks like, what their product experience looks like. And it's not necessarily hard and fast, like there are these numbers that we look at or metrics that we're tracking. It's simply just they know that it's a problem and they're motivated to fix it. So it's rare that I'm going to ever try to convince somebody of an issue, either with their brand or with their product, outside of specific like
Mm,
features or things like that we get into. Obviously, there would be maybe things that we would look at there, but initially it's basically just conversations and workshops and doing kind of some in-depth thought exercises where I'll walk them through various questions, various exercises, and kind of force them to think through things that they might not normally be thinking through.
Are there steps that you start with, for example, start with the positioning and then messaging and then slowly focus and then move towards the design side, or how do you kind of structure it?
Yeah, ideally, there's time for in-depth conversations around your positioning and really just the strategy, starting with the big picture. And I kind of think of it as three different levels, and you can kind of stack these. And the first is basically having to do with authenticity. So those are things like, why are we building this business in the first place? What's motivating us, and kind of our mission that we want to go on.
Mm.
Really getting clear on kind of why this business exists and the problem that we want to solve. And then right after that, I think is core values. How are we going to go about building it in a way that is uniquely us, and do it in a way that will allow us to attract talent and attract more people who think like we think and who want to go about this the same kind of way. So defining, their mission and purpose and things like that, defining their core values, that really establishes that foundational kind of authenticity layer. And then you move up into positioning, which is much more around what problem are we solving in the market, and how do we frame that problem in a way that is going to be distinct and is going to be valuable for the audience that we want to attract. And then the last level is messaging. How do we actually communicate that on the website, in marketing, through maybe a pitch, like an investor pitch deck? How do we take that and actually make it something that you could do in like an elevator pitch or a landing page or something like that? Okay, so that's kind
I
of how I
really
define
like
strategy, is those three things, those three phases.
I really like the phase around like the what is our unique point of view, what is our authentic origin story, for example, because
Sure.
I feel that a lot of B2B startups these days are just copying everyone else. And so they don't really have a unique taste of why should we exist. They basically look at the incumbent or look at the top competitor, and they basically just try to create a variant of that. Are you seeing that as well? And I guess why do most startups or even just marketers and B2B tech especially just copy users as a tactic or playbook?
Yeah, I think I see that a lot. And I think that there are aspects where it's really understandable. And in some ways, it might be an okay place to start because it's a way for you to test. And so there's probably this feeling of safety that you want to, if it's working for so and so, then maybe we can jump on that bandwagon and basically try to gain market share over them by doing it just a little bit better. It's the sort of thing that you can gain some short term traction, but it's not a long term winning strategy. So I think that it's safety, and it's just harder to make a bold choice and to really have a strong point of view. That being said, I also think that people tend to overcomplicate it, and it doesn't have to be this 0 to 1 kind of innovation or this totally radical new way of seeing the world. There are subtle ways that you can carve out that differentiation, and it doesn't have to be. I tend to have more of an abundance mindset around that there's a lot of space for various players to jump in and provide value, and it doesn't have to be too complicated.
Does it depend on the market that you're in? For example, if you have a big TAM, then maybe there's opportunity for multiple players to be in the market versus a smaller
Yeah,
one. So you have to be radically different
for sure.
to
Yeah,
the
I definitely
competition.
think, yeah, if depending on which niche you're in, yeah, there's going to be there may only be a handful of players, and so you can get in and you're basically just like providing very similar things, and there's very marginal ways that you can create differentiation, versus other things where let's take like the AI and whether it's various tools right now around AI and coding agents and all that kind of stuff. It seems like there's just like a new one that pops up every single day, and they're fighting against incumbents like OpenAI and Anthropic and all these giants that are in that space. It's like it's the big hot thing, and everyone's also trying to do what these huge
Mm.
organizations are doing that have a giant moat just because of distribution, and it's kind of a losing battle unless there's real strong differentiation.
What's been the toughest industry or vertical you've worked with a client? Like I've been seeing a lot of like AI GTM or AI marketing space, but yeah, what's been your
Yeah,
experience so far?
I guess it depends on what you mean by challenging. As far as just, I guess for me personally, I've both loved and found it very challenging to work within the like blockchain and crypto space. I have a lot of clients in that that world, and I love them, and I think that it's just very there's a lot of rigor that goes into the fidelity, if you will, like the aesthetic taste and the high bar that a lot of those clients have to sort of have something that feels amazing and never seen
Revolutionary.
before. Yeah, revolutionary
Yeah.
is definitely challenging to sort of meet and exceed that expectation. So from just an interpersonal standpoint, a lot of people within the crypto space, for whatever reason, have a really unique, specific idea in their head, and it can be very challenging to come alongside them and help to bring that to life. And when you do it, I think it's really amazing. But at the same time, there have been a few kind of hit and miss, and just kind of having to pivot and try to figure out a different path.
Have you ever had situations, let's say, with those blockchain clients where you have to kind of educate them on what is a pretty brand versus a powerful brand? Has it been a case?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where the kind of work that I feel like I'm in is just so subjective, because you're talking about it's at the end of the day you're basically talking about like taste, and so
Yeah.
it's very like Rick Rubin. It's like on some level, I like that the work in our portfolio doesn't really ascribe to a specific style. It's not like you look at it and kind of go, "Oh yeah, everything kind of looks the same." They sort of have this playbook that they run, and they have a look and an aesthetic. But I think some of the challenges to that is that it sort of can put you into this box where you're putting a ton of pressure on yourself to try to, come up with something that's, either never been seen before or feels somehow novel. But what's novel to me is not necessarily what's novel to our clients. And so, yeah,
Mm.
there's definitely, I think, a lot of stuff that happens to happen on the front end and throughout the creative process, where we're using mood boarding and we're using concepts and metaphors, and we're trying to anchor everything in as much of an objective standard as we possibly can, so that we can all kind of stand around it and go like, yeah, I think that's better than this direction, because it does a better job of kind of like allowing you to tell this metaphor story about your technology. So to me, that's kind of what it comes down to, is basically trying to use metaphor and use any kind of imagery and other kinds of color, psychology, basically, to try to just help to give them the language to be able to say why the design decisions are what they are.
I saw that you have a background in acting, I believe.
Yeah,
How does that kind of influence your work and storytelling and how you kind of work
yeah,
with clients?
yeah. It's definitely helped quite a bit. I mean, I think on on the one hand, it's just helpful in improv, and sort of the idea of being able to be present with people and connected, just basically emotional intelligence, right? So being an actor is basically understanding human psychology and being able to figure out how to convey a story through a character. I think that just day to day, it's helped me in being able to be present with clients, and it's helped me in being able to connect with people and find things about people that we can talk about, and I just enjoy meeting new people and making friends with new folks. So that's one thing that's just kind of a practical aspect. As far as the work and the real kind of like the meat of the work, I definitely lean on some acting and storytelling techniques and some things like character building. And so there's some frameworks that have been really
Mm.
helpful. For instance, there's this one called a character diamond. Whenever you're developing a character, if you look up in screenwriting and screenplays, a character diamond is something that you basically have a primary attribute. You imagine a diamond shape. You've got a primary attribute, and then you have a contrasting attribute that's sort of like almost like a paradox. And then you'll have maybe something that's more around kind of the heart and sort of their values, and then some sort of quirk, some sort of, you know, outlier thing. And so that's a really helpful device for working with a brand to kind of understand like, okay, so we want to be like X, we want to be like this attribute up here that is kind of
Mm.
this chief thing that we're going after. At the same time, though, the contrast to that is that, we're also, and then whatever that secondary trait is, and that sort of like conflicts. And then in that tension, you find a lot of interesting ways of kind of saying like, how is it possible that we can be both X and Y? And in that, you get to try to explore and try to find, oh, the reason why is because of this. And that gives you a lot of inspiration for coming up with visuals, coming up with language. So again, that's more of like a how the sausage is made. I don't always let clients in on
Mm,
that kind of thing because it's maybe not helpful for them. But that is one of those
yeah.
pieces that I think is really helpful. Just a mental model for me to be able to kind of fill in as we're going along. Oh, okay, I'm trying to craft a character for what this company's like, and then reflecting that back to them. When people feel seen and heard, it's very rewarding. They feel like, wow, you get it, and that's an exciting moment.
This is so interesting because I had another guest earlier, and he's called Tommy Walker. He also has a acting background,
Nice.
and
Yeah, I
now
think I
like
saw
he
that.
was
I think
the
I saw that episode.
yeah. Oh, awesome! Yeah, he was the first Shopify hire, and then now he runs his own like creative studio, and so it feels like acting has a lot of benefits that translate into content marketing or just marketing in general,
Yeah,
which
for
is
sure.
great.
Yeah, and you see that with like,
Do
Donald
you?
Miller or something like that, writing Story Brand. He was an author and wrote Really Like
Mm.
Jazz and a bunch of other books. And, I think you see that commonly in just writers in general. So, yeah, it makes sense.
Do you have any resources or even just people that you follow actively to kind of learn or update yourself on these maybe principles or yeah, if you're willing to share any?
Yeah, of course. Are you talking about like acting and that kind of thing? Or are you talking about
Yes,
just
like
like,
storytelling. Yeah,
yeah,
acting,
so there's
storytelling.
a book called by John York. John York has a bunch of really interesting stuff. And there's a book called The Five Act Journey into, or I think it's called Into the Woods, is the book that I would
Mm,
recommend. And he basically uses kind of like a five act narrative structure. That's another thing we haven't really touched on, but that's something that I've definitely leaned on and that I do continually think about for just writing in general is like a five act narrative structure. Um, I think Andy Raskin is a lot more in the realm of B2B kind of writing and pitch storytelling, strategic narrative. So he's much more on the nose of kind of bridging, here are these storytelling principles with here's how it is applied to B2B. There's the book The Hero and the Outlaw. That's obviously much more around brand archetypes and things like that, but
mm,
that's definitely kind of
yeah.
within that realm and looking into brand archetypes as a resource. Yeah, there's
Okay.
let me think if there's a few others that come to mind.
I'll include these in the show notes afterwards as well for people who are
Yeah,
interested.
yeah. Others that would be like Robert McKee is another one, or
Mm, yeah.
is it the? I'm trying to remember his name. Oh yeah, Stephen Pressfield, The War of Art.
Oh yeah.
These are yeah.
I
That's
really
another
love
great
that
one.
book.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's obviously
Yeah.
again more within the realm of just modern day business advice, but I think his background is more in screenwriting and things like that.
What is a brand or company that you think they are doing a really good job? And
That's a good question. These are the things that when you've seen a lot, you're like, try not to go there.
putting you on the stand.
Yeah. Um, I mean, I guess it depends on what kind of. Yeah, I don't know. I actually don't know that I have an answer for that. Do you have
Or
one?
maybe something that stands out. Oh, actually, have you heard of a company called Cluely by any chance?
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
They are, I think the founder is like 21, 22 years old. I think they raise quite a bit of money. Um, they're basically like a software that helps people
Oh
cheat.
yeah, right.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
they
yeah.
had
I
like
tried that out.
ads in Times Square. They had like yeah, a bunch of these stunts. They have like a mascot called Clue. They're all over
Yeah,
TikTok and Instagram. Yeah.
yeah. What do you think about that?
I had a conversation with another person, and like basically the takeaway was I think they're good at capturing attention, but I would say it's hard to be contrarian every single time. Like there will be a moment where people just kind of zone out or just feel this is so normal, and so it doesn't really reflect the product they're trying to build. A lot of people have said that the product doesn't really live up to the expectations. It's just really good marketing and just you're just creating a bunch of noise. So
Yeah.
it
Yeah,
may be
I
like a
probably, I think
short-lived sort of thing.
in that specific example, I would say that it's not great marketing and also the product sucks because I tried it. Like, this is really
Okay.
bad. I was just like, this is a really weird interface. It did not do it all what I thought it would. And I
Mm.
also almost didn't even try it out just because the way that they were basically trying to sell it was like, hey, this is this thing that helps you cheat. And I'm like, great, I am not interested. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
I feel like that's where there's a deeper code that's going on there. Where I think if you're going to kind of build your whole business around something that is not good, then you're not going to get traction, and you might be able to get attention, but it's ultimately not going to
Mm.
result in any kind of meaningful. Marty Neumeier talks about that as the highest good and seeking customers benefit. Talking about a brand, most brands that you would think about, obviously in his day he's thinking about Apple and Microsoft and those kinds of things, but those kinds of companies are building products that are to help people's creativity and to help them to go out and build businesses and build a life for themselves, those kinds of things, versus something like
Mm.
Vegas, right? A
Yeah.
brand, if you put Vegas as a brand, it's playing on people's vices. And so I would put Cluely in that category. I think that the product potential is not necessarily playing to people's vices, but I think if you market it as this is this thing that helps you cheat, it's like that was really short sighted. Yeah, not going to end well.
I mean, the origin story was, I believe, the founder got kicked out of Columbia University or something, and then I'm not sure if it was because of cheating or not, but yeah, that was why the company existed.
Hmm,
So
fun.
yeah, it's kind of hard to
Yeah, I hadn't heard that.
reposition.
Yeah.
Do you have a framework for? I guess Cluely would be like a very new product, I would say. But let's say if we were to work on a commoditized product category, for example, Martech or Sales Tech, how do you figure out or what are ways to make a brand stick and stand out from all the competitors out there? Because
Yeah.
eventually, in these saturated markets, everyone basically has the same features, and so maybe they're just competing on price or whatnot. But how do you kind of think of what is our unique edge? How do we stand out?
Yeah. Well, I think, well, I actually wrote about this recently, and I've been thinking about kind of relating to the acting thing. I think in order to be obviously good, you need something that's obviously bad. So you need contrast, basically, and
Mm,
conflict, right? Every good story has conflict. And so one of the first questions that you have to ask is who's the enemy and what's the conflict that we want to pick. And so the way that I think of it, there's really four categories of options. So the first category would be that you're going to basically be at odds with the industry or the status quo. The other thing that you could be at odds with would be the customer's problem. So that's the most normal kind of thing, right? You have this problem, we have a solution, and that's,
mm,
I think most people's go to. The other two would be taking a shot at the current solutions. So here is the customer's problem, but we're actually going to take a stand against the current way that people are solving that problem. And then the last would be more of shift in the way that society is going, the way that buyers are buying, some sort of industry shift. And so they're kind of two sides of the same coin, or maybe two coins with two sides.
mm.
So you've got the industry and then shift, right? So what's the industry doing, or how is the landscape shifting? And those are kind of two different ways that you can look at it. And then what is the customer's problem, or what are the current solutions to that problem? But if you can take one of those four and you can really specify how you're different and try to amp up the contrast in one of those four categories, that's the starting point. You have to start there and pick kind of an enemy.
Mm.
And obviously it's kind of abrasive language, but again, in the context of making a bolder choice, I think it is really important to basically start with what's the conflict, what's the contrast, and then you can build the rest of the
Mm.
story based off of that.
This sounds like a positioning exercise, like trying to frame your company with whatever the customer
Yeah,
is sort of thinking
for
about.
sure. Yep.
This is this brand positioning or is this product positioning? What is the difference between the two? And I guess in what situation would you use one over the other?
Yeah, well, I think it depends on the stage of the company and whether there's a difference between their brand or their product. I think depending on how tactical you get, it's probably going to be more in the realm of product positioning. But if you're building a movement or a brand, and there is a big contrast there. It just kind of depends on what's the substance of it. If you're trying to build something within like what you were mentioning, marketing tech or sales tech, that's probably going to be more along the lines
Mm,
of product positioning. But I've worked with certain brands in the more like ed tech space that are trying to build more of a movement for the way that college campuses work or the way that they help drive student success. And those things start to allow other people into them. For instance, I worked with one client that does a lot with virtual career centers. And so they ended up building a brand and even kind of a sub brand, if you will, that had events and it had swag and t-shirts, and it was kind of all about students and their careers and how they thought about careers and how they showed them data. And so obviously there's a product involved, but it's creating a community, and it's creating more um, alignment and a sense of belonging to people who are actually working at the schools, because they feel like they're now a part of it. It's not just the organization, it's kind of the champions or the ambassadors of that company
mm,
within that organization. And so to me, I would like that would feel more like a brand kind of positioning, but it's very much taking a shot at the status quo of how colleges operate and how
yeah.
students are evaluating their career options. So I think it's universally applicable. It just depends on how specific you get, and whether it's going to be for a product or for a brand.
Mm, fair enough. Yeah, I guess that is quite complex, and you have to take into industry, market trends, the customers,
Yeah.
like the founder, um, yeah, a lot of things. Do you use much AI in your line of work, especially let's say with the brand strategy, positioning? Because I imagine you'd be able to, let's say, type in something in ChatGPT and try to like get it to brainstorm with you. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, I love using AI. I definitely use AI. I would say that my use of it is always evolving, and I'm always trying to learn more and push the boundaries. I will say that I think that the use cases of it are not dwindling, but they're just coming more into focus, and they're less like novel than when a lot of
Mm,
ChatGPT and other things like that were coming out. To me, I think the biggest things are like note takers and the fact that I have hours of transcripts, right, that I can keep in a project. So I'm a big fan. I think I pay the pro plans of Claude and ChatGPT and maybe another one.
mm,
Lots of little AI tools here and there, but I try to build projects for different clients that I'm working with so that I can be dumping in resources, jumping in, documents, meeting transcripts, and then at the same time also trying to document and keep track of certain frameworks and certain ways that I like to go about doing some of the work so that we can run that content through those things to get a first pass at you got this raw material over here and you've got this framework. Just take a pass at basically what's your stab at what you would say, or what are different ways of wording
mm,
that. So it's never for me been a one to one of like AI just does this work now, but it's very
yeah.
much in the realm of a thought partner and allows me, especially since I'm much more verbal, I like to process verbally. There are definitely times where I will get a conversation going and then we'll literally just chat through and do like a transcript where I'm starting to talk through various things, and that's been a helpful tool for me for sure.
I've definitely seen AI being more and more like a strategist, thought partner, kind of sparring partner, rather than someone you're trying to outsource your thinking. Because I've
Yeah,
definitely seen a lot of, I guess, more younger generation where any sort of problem they encounter, they can just put it through ChatGPT. And so obviously they might get the answer in the end, but it really limits their ability to think critically. And so maybe it's
right.
something that hinders their abilities in the future.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's where I would just say that I think that especially within the realm of differentiation and those kinds of things, I think that it's never the case that you're like write a tagline, like you never ask for the end output. I don't find that. I've never found that to be helpful.
Mm,
I think it's more of, a helpful starting point for me to, let's say I'm working with a brand and I'm trying to think through metaphors, or I'm trying to think through, something like that. And so I'll have a list of things that I'm thinking about, and then I can basically just get to a stopping point and go, okay, great. Here's all the context. Here are all the metaphors. What am I not thinking of? And I think there are certain
mm,
ways of approaching AI and asking certain questions to basically go like, okay, after the strategy's done, put it in there. What are the blind spots? What is this missing? What things is this not accounting for? So asking for those blank spaces and asking for the omissions, I think is more beneficial just because it starts to, poke at what you might be missing.
nice. Um, Final question. Where do you see brand moving towards? Because at least on LinkedIn, at least, I'm seeing more and more people investing in content, investing in brand, just because they know that in saturated markets, it's so competitive. So you really have to build that mind share, that mental availability within your customers. So when they're in market to buy, then they kind of think of you, which is exactly what Overline is trying to do, like
Yeah.
make brand the obvious choice. But do you see this kind of continuing? What sort of trends are you seeing at the moment?
Yeah. I guess I think that, the on some level, I think that that will always be valuable. Like, I think that, you know, good design, and specifically I'm thinking of it in terms of the product itself, that kind of work I think is always going to be important, because no matter how they ultimately find you, they have to find that there's something of value there. And so there's no shortcuts that way. So I think
Mm,
if anything, I think brand is becoming more closely aligned with product, and vice versa, to where there's not. I mean, you certainly see, like, Scott Galloway had a little rant that he was going on, basically talking about brand being dead. And in that context, he's talking about, the age of being able to sway people's and buyers' perception through advertising is over. And I generally agree with that idea. But, I think because of like search and the way that people are more or less finding things, and just how transparent the internet is in terms of, if you have a product that's not very good, you're not going to have any kind of customer base, or you're not going to have any good reviews. You're not going to have any of that social kind of effects that happen. So I think more and more the proof is in the pudding. You have to create a great product. And if you create a great
mm.
product, then I think that, that's the majority of the battle.
People always say we're entering the attention economy or distribution is king. But I would
Mm-hmm.
still say, even as a marketer, foundationally, the product still trumps everything. Because if you have a bad product, you'll just get a lot of churn. And then basically, no matter how much you're spending to grab the attention, it just wouldn't convert. Which I'm assuming that's what's happening with Cluely, but hard to tell. So that would be hopefully something we'll be able to see in the future.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
Awesome, JT. This was an amazing chat. I really loved our conversation. Feel like we talked a bunch of things. Where can people find you? Where are you most active? And can I just
Yeah,
understand more
most
about your work?
most active on LinkedIn. I think that's the main place to check out. Just JT Grauke on LinkedIn, and then, yeah, Overline.studio, and so yeah, there you go.